No law commands a man to silence his own conscience, yet in recent months that silence seems to have spread from fear, not peace. In Minneapolis, on the steps of the federal courthouse, the name Renee Good has been spoken in whispers. In Los Angeles, candles burn where Alex Pretty fell beneath blue lights and shouted orders. Their faces appeared on protest signs as troops stood watching, not foreign troops, but Americans in uniform. How did the nation of free speech come to this strange and sorrowful place? In those nights, federal agents and National Guard units moved under executive orders said to preserve order amid protest. Some had come under the Insurrection Act's claim, others under the reach of immigration enforcement. The administration called it a matter of safety. Dissenters called it suppression. Even the Supreme Court felt the tremor, striking down an order that forced the Illinois Guard from the governor to the president's hand. Picture that courthouse in Springfield, quiet as the ruling came, judges explaining that even the commander must share command. But the echo reached beyond any one state. It was the old American question again. When does strength serve liberty, and when does it swallow it? There is something older than these present fears that still demands an answer. It lies in our Constitution's first freedoms, speech and assembly, written not as suggestions, but as the lifeblood of the Republic. They stand above comfort, above party, above the will of any single man. Yet each generation must decide whether they remain living rights or honored memory. We seldom notice when liberty bends under danger. Sometimes power takes only a little, a cordon around a city square, an order to disperse, and calls it temporary. But temporary power likes company, and it often stays past its welcome. Picture a line of citizens on Hennepin Avenue, holding signs against a row of armor and shields. The air hums with drones. A lone violinist plays what sounds like a prayer. No shot is fired, yet freedom feels at gunpoint. Is that silence peace, or the stillness before speech itself is lost? Those are the questions a free nation dares to ask. The founders faced the same dread in their own storm. The Alien and Sedition Acts punished those who spoke too sharply against their rulers. Later, in my own time, a man named Clement Vallandigham stood on an Ohio platform and denounced war. He was seized by troops and condemned by a military court. I know the pain of necessity. I signed orders that tested the limits of the law. But even then, the conscience of a republic demanded rebuke as well as defense. I learned that force might bind bodies, but only speech, free, even foolish speech, can bind hearts back to trust. If authority survives by stifling its critics, it survives without honor. Think of the old telegrams stored in the War Department, marked censored. Think of the Japanese-American families herded under the flag their sons died for. Think of Kent State, where youth met rifles across a university lawn. Each believed it was only for a time. Each left the nation smaller in spirit. We do not lack warnings, we lack remembrance. The power that claims an emergency is quick to forget when the emergency ends. Does power ever yield back the rights it borrows? Not without the courage of those who ask for them. In the marble chambers of Washington today, lawyers argue the reach of the Insurrection Act. Words like deference and necessity fill the air. But outside, on the steps of that same city, journalists and citizens still hold signs quoting the First Amendment word for word. They too serve the law, though they carry no badge. When their voices grow faint, the Constitution itself speaks only in echo. The courts may rule, Congress may inquire, but no parchment will enforce itself. A republic breathes only through its people. Imagine the dome of the Capitol under soft rain as visitors pause to read the carvings. E pluribus unum. Out of many, one. A child asks her father what it means. He says, "It means we agree to disagree without fear." Such a lesson cannot live on marble alone. It must be taught by example, by leaders who use power as trust, not weapon. The lesson is older than law books. It says that government gains no moral right from sheer might. A bayonet may guard a gate, but not a soul. True order rests not on fear, but on consent, and consent is born from respect. This is the quiet duty that lies heavier than armor, to serve both safety and liberty without crushing either. I have seen how fast passion can burn reason to ash. Crowds shout, leaders boast. The Constitution becomes a banner waved in rivalry instead of a compact kept in conscience. But this nation has known its better self too. It was there at Selma when marchers crossed a bridge unarmed yet unyielding. It was there when courts upheld a flag burner's right to offend rather than forbid. And it was there in every peaceful rally where the strong walked past the loud, confident that free speech is not weakness but proof of control. Think back to the morning in Minneapolis, to Los Angeles streets swept clean at dawn, chalk hearts left on the sidewalk beside two names. No policy can redeem such loss, but a recommitment to principle can prevent its repetition. That is the charge of citizenship, to look upon power not with hatred, but with steady eyes. A free citizen says to his government, "Your duty is to guard my rights, not to grant them." And a just government answers, "So long as you speak in peace, you keep me honest." Because if we forget that exchange, freedom fades not by force, but by fatigue. Every time fear persuades us to look away, liberty learns silence. But when one voice rises for lawful dissent, it stirs another, and the chain of speech holds firm again. The Republic has survived darker nights, rebellion, depression, terror. It will survive these too, if citizens prize law above comfort and conscience above ease. Picture the sunrise over Lake Michigan, gilding the skyline of Chicago, while workers file into the courthouse there, holding jury summons and folded newspapers. They are ordinary people, yet they hold in their hands the steady machinery of liberty. No army guards that door, only faith in fair process, and the idea that truth spoken aloud can hold even power to account. That is what the founders meant by self-government. Not rule by the loudest, nor by the most afraid, but by those who can be trusted to reason and to wait for justice rather than seize it. Their model has been strained before. In 1861, men doubted whether law could resist rebellion. In 1933, they doubted whether democracy could survive despair. In every such hour, Americans learned the same truth. Freedom endures not because leaders claim it, but because common men refuse to lose it. Picture the courthouse in Springfield again, its stone worn by rain. Inside, a clerk files the judgment that returned command of the guard to the people's governor. It is a small act on paper, yet immense in spirit, a reminder that checks and balances are not burdens, but shields erected against our own impatience. For the Constitution is not a cage upon government. It is the frame that makes its work worth doing. Every command signed in haste, every protest silenced for convenience, chips at that frame. But each time citizens insist on hearing the other side, each time an officer restrains his hand out of respect for oath, the frame is mended. Law breathes again. So the test does not belong only to presidents or judges. It belongs to you, to the quiet watcher, the thoughtful listener, the one who believes the voice of conscience needs no parade. Speak calmly, question firmly, trust that no truth is served by fear. If those habits hold, the Republic can be saved. And when law and liberty collide upon your doorstep, when your comfort conflicts with another's right to speak, what will your answer be?